pretty exciting time with, electric bikes. I mean, your history has been fossil fuel burning, but it's no coincidence now that it's called Sierra Mobility, the KTM parent company in Austria.
Yes.
So just a bit of a sense of what the electric bike era has brought to the company and the opportunities.
Yeah, look, I think they've really thought about this. It's something that they see as being sustainable into the future. Try and work out, we're losing more and more riding areas, fossil fuels getting more expensive. So they've really thought about how can they make motorbikes more obtainable, more accessible to the average person, get the kids on bikes and get them riding early to fall in love like we all have with motorbikes for the rest of their lives. And I think this is a really big step towards that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, the context. I think it's really important. People always want to know this is a completely new model, new concept, how does it fit in? I think at your presentation a little bit earlier, you said, first of all, you made the point that it's a true race bike. But,
yes.
The incredible thing, I think, is that these things are really covering ages 3 to 8 or even 3 to 10, some of the presentations suggested.
Absolutely. And look, KTM is a company that makes bikes that are ready to race. It's not a play bike, it's not a fun bike. The name says it all, SX-E5, so sports mini cycle, powered by electricity with a 5 kilowatt motor. And what they've tried to do is cover literally 3 bikes in one. So you buy this bike, so it can be reduced down to an SX-50 Mini, the size is for a 3-year-old. The power can be reduced to get that rider confident riding, and then as he develops in size and ability, the power and the size of the bike grows with him, right up to nearly a 65. It literally ends up slightly bigger than an SX-50, and then the next step would be onto a 65.
Okay, and I guess with the, probably the shock for a lot of people is the, recommended retail of 884. So that messaging you're just talking about, it's an upfront cost, but it's going to cover them over a much wider range than those other sort of.
Absolutely, it covers a wide. We're expecting this bike to last a long time. There are literally no moving parts internally. It's a brushless DC motor. The maintenance is absolutely minimal, so you would pass it on to your sibling for the next cycle through again.
Yeah, sure. So no oil, no exhaust, no fuel, but people are always going to ask, the charging logistics, is it easier for me to exchange a battery versus charging? Give us an idea, because from what you're saying, the charge it's pretty quick.
It is, so between 45 and 70 minutes. So within 45 minutes you have 80% charge. At 70 minutes you'll have 100% charge. And we imagine that what you would do is you would have a generator or a power point in your backyard, and you would trickle charge it during the day in between rides. The battery pack isn't easily changed, so a lot of people are thinking, I'll have a spare battery and just swap it over. It's actually probably more efficient to charge the bike. And the bike itself, the battery itself, already they have statistics with 500 cycles of charging of the battery, it's still maintaining more than 70% of its charge. So a very reliable battery pack as well.
Okay. Again, just coming back to big picture context, I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking, it's great, I can take it down the local, down the local BMX track or whatever, but just sort of take us through, because obviously the limitation, I think, with throttle versus pedal power and also this 25 kilometre an hour limit.
I mean, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it, to go to the BMX tracks, but it's actually not legal. In Australia, we have a design rule that you have a pedal assisted up to 25 kilometres an hour without any registration or licensing required. The moment it's actually electrically driven, so with a throttle, and it has the ability to go over 25 kilometres an hour, it becomes an unregistered, unlicensable rider in public spaces. So it is just for closed circuit riding.
But on the positive side, I think you said because it's a low voltage arrangement, and I'm not sure that was intentionally done, but it means that you don't have to have some specific high voltage certificate as if you're a workshop working on these things, right?
Absolutely.
Which you had to with the Freeride.
Freeride E is a high voltage, so to actually work on that bike you needed a HV certificate. So they really thought about the maintenance on this bike, the ability for the dealer to sell the bike, and as such it comes out under the 60 volt, so fully charged it's about 52 volts. So that negates the need for them to have any sort of special qualifications to work on the bike or to sell the bike. So yeah, and I think low voltage is probably the future for motorbikes.
Okay. thing that keeps jumping out at me is the adaptability of these things. You alluded to it before, but let's just go through, I guess, in two bits, what we can do from a sort of ergos and suspension point of view. I think we've got 100 millimetres in difference, so the thing can really be quite versatile, but then also the power mode. So maybe just from the ergos, or how you can adapt the size and scale.
For sure. So literally it has 5 to 6 steps in 25 millimetre measurements. And to do that 100 millimetre complete low down to the mini, it does require some suspension modification. So internal spacers, and then the bodywork follows it down as well. And then opposite, as you grow, the bodywork comes up, the suspension increases to get back to the full size.
Okay. And then on the power modes, I mean, you know, there's 3 obvious power modes, but in essence, you've actually got 6, what a lot of people don't sort of realise. Just sort of take us through that. 1, how it's done, and 2, you know, the differences. Is it power, is it torque, is it combination?
Exactly. So really interesting. It has 6 modes. I mean, the actual indicator only shows 3, but as you work through the modes, so 1 is literally walking pace. Very, very easy to teach someone to ride in level 1. Then as you step up, the torque curve changes. So you get more and more torque as it goes up. Until you're in the very highest 2 settings, 5 and 6, the torque curve remains the same, just the throttle response changes. And there's some really cool safety features.
How's the next thing I was going to ask you? Yeah.
So one of the things that they really thought about was that if you were teaching a rider to ride who's a fairly confident little rider, he could ride off into the distance and up the power without your consent. So under the seat there is actually a lanyard with a magnet, so you set the power that you would like him to ride in, and you can remove that magnet and that locks it in that power setting.
Okay. And a couple of things on the bars too. I know with the throttle, but also there's effectively a kill switch, like I guess a jet ski style, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it actually has a built-in rollover sensor. So if the bike tips over and the rider's trapped underneath or something like that, the bike actually does turn over. It detects that it's rolled over. But there's also a lanyard with another magnet on a kill switch. So if the rider falls off the bike, the lanyard removes the kill switch and kills the motor instantly. So really nice features. Then it's quite a sequence to get the bike to actually move.
Yes.
So you first of all activate the battery. So you press a button on the battery. You then select the power mode that you would like, and then you need to overclose the throttle, meaning exactly till it beeps, and then the bike will move forward. So if the rider falls off and a kill switch is activated, he would then need to reset the power mode, overclose the throttle till it beeps, and away he goes.
But it also stops somebody just grabbing the thing in the car park and looping
Absolutely.
it out. They don't realise it's live in effect.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Maintenance, another interesting issue. Obviously without oil and fuel and all these other things, maintenance is going to be something you guys are going to be really pushing. I think you said there was only one, the countershaft sprocket bearings after
40 hours.
40 hours, right.
Spot on. So as far as the power unit, the only thing required is the bearings on either side of the countershaft be replaced every 40 hours. Other than that, it's your tyres, chain, sprocket, suspension, which you would do on a combustion motor anyway, bike. But as far as the power plant concerned, it's just those 2 bearings.
And let's talk a bit about that component spec. Obviously there's some standalone stuff like, the frame I know has to be different from say 50 SX to accommodate a completely different power unit. But just sort of take us through, just big picture wise, what's different and what components, for instance, it might share with us, say 50
Yeah, really interesting, because it's designed to compete against the SX-50 petrol powered motor, and it shares a lot of components. So the handlebar setup, the triple clamp, the suspension, the swing arm, the brake system, the rear sprocket, the chain, all that is shared between those 2 bikes. So it truly is an SX-50 powered by electricity.
You reckon some smart ass is going to try and get a power unit and slip it into their 50 SX?
Yeah, that
Probably
would
not possible, right?
No, that would be difficult. The frame itself is a little different. Yeah.
So you just talked about the racing. I know in America they announced a few months ago that there's a new Mini E class, I think they're calling it, so it's going to run as its own standalone class. Here in Australia, it looks like we're approaching it a bit differently.
Yeah, interesting. MA have thought about this, and what they'd like to do is have this bike compete against the petrol-powered bikes, and what they've done is allowed that at club level to start with, just to get a feel for how competitive the bike is compared to the petrol bikes. And from there, we're hoping that in the future they'll then be allowed into state titles and into the national titles to compete head-to-head with the petrol bike.
And what's your view on that? My view, I've seen kids back to back, and you know, you've got to be quite a talented rider to ride a 50 well. Or quite, not so much talented, but quite experienced, right? It's not as easy, whereas the instantaneous torque and power in these things, particularly in loamy type or slick conditions, is going to make the e-bike a whole lot easier.
I think for the majority of riders, the e-bike is probably easier to ride. Whether it's easier to ride fast or not would be, time will tell, but there are some advantages. So with the e-bike, the power delivery is instantaneous. With the petrol bike, there's a bit of a lag because it takes the clutch to take up and the power to deliver. So coming off the turn, the e-bike has the advantage, but by the end of the straight, the petrol bike has the advantage. So in overall lap time, I really think they're very comparable.
Mate, word on the street is that you and Johnny D were cutting a few laps out here in the workshop. Who got the better of who?
No, we only had one bike, so it was against the clock. Okay. No, look, it was really interesting when we first got the bike to evaluate. You know, we couldn't help ourselves, but to have a zip around the workshop, and look, incredibly impressive, really impressive.
And look, just in terms of the power output, obviously 5 stands for 5 kilowatt, I think we didn't. How does that compare? What's the sort of horsepower from a 50 SX?
Yeah, that's something that we need to haven't really overlaid the petrol on the electric power delivery. So, yeah, it would be very interesting to know.
Cool. Anyway, well, thanks for your time, Rob. Really interesting to get insight into these things today. And,
thank you.
Good luck with the future. I think we're going to see probably this won't be the only model that's going to be e-powered, you know.
I don't believe so.
In the next few years.
I think we've got some exciting things coming.